Good morning. I was thinking this past week about how I would prefer that a person listen to all of a 5-minute talk instead of just part of a 35-minute talk. So I decided to limit my words as much as possible and shorten this presentation. And I'll try to get straight to the point. Today, my topic is judgment. Now, this is something that we truly detest when someone does it to us. But when we do it to someone else, we hardly even notice. Judgment has to do with condemnation and separation. It's making a decision about right and wrong. And in order for us to do that, we would have to know the total truth. We would have to know everything about the other individual from the time of conception, everything they've ever experienced, everything that they've ever thought, every emotion that they've ever had, and every influence in their lives, whether good or bad. Now, this is impossible for us, but it's not impossible with God. Now, the only person we could ever come close to judging would be our own self. So let's start there. If you judge, you will be judged. There's a story told in 2 Samuel chapter 12 about King David. Now, David was a type of young man that was a shepherd boy. He grew up in the fields and he tended sheep. He took care of the sheep. He slept with the sheep. He even protected them from the wolves and the bear. Now, one day, the prophet Nathan came to David after he was king, and he told him a story. He said, David, there was a king in a town, and he had lots of possessions. He had lots of sheep and lots of cattle. There was also a poor man in the town that only had one little ewe sheep that he had bought with his own money. And this sheep grew up in his family. It ate at their table, and it slept in their bed. One day, the king had a guest that came in from out of town, and he decided to throw a great feast for this guest. But instead of going out into the field and getting one of his own sheep, he took the poor man's sheep. Now, at this point, David was furious. He was very angry. He said, this man ought to be lynched. He ought to die. Now, there's a very important point here. It is easy for us to judge others in areas where we think that we have not failed. David had a lot of emotion, a lot of anger, but what he didn't realize is it was about to be turned around on him. You see, in the way that we judge, we will be judged. Nathan looked right at David and said, David, you are the wicked king. For David had stolen the wife of one of his servants. Now, in the New Testament, we have the Pharisees who had caught a woman in the act of adultery, and they had brought her before Jesus and thrown her at his feet. They said, this woman deserves to be stoned. But what they didn't realize is that Jesus had not come into the world to judge the world, but to rescue and to save the world. After a few minutes of contemplation, Jesus looked up and said, let the one without sin cast the first stone. And the Pharisees began to drop their rocks and walk away. Now, condemnation is hard to bear, but separation can be just as painful. Verbally condemning and separating can both have the same devastating effect. And in this situation with the adulterous woman, Jesus did neither. He did not judge her. So how can we live a life without judging? What do we do? Well, the simplest thing is to say, you see this? This is like a speck. You should see my sin as a toothpick, and I should see my sin as a log. God says, don't take the speck out of your brother's eye until you take the log out of your own eye. And if I look at my sin and I see all the wickedness that I'm doing and it's always in front of me, then you will always look better than me. Think about it. And may God give us wisdom on how to love our neighbor as ourself. God bless.